Welcome to the McFeely Mess podcast at Inforum.com. In-depth conversations and opinion covering a variety of topics from the world of news, sports, and more. Here's Mike McFeely.
Time for another episode of the McFeely Mess podcast at Inforum.com. And we're just going to get right into it because our technology let us down yesterday and it might let us down again today. So let's knock out as much as we can with our guest, Clay Jenkinson, who is coming to us live and direct, as the late, great Ed Schultz would say, live and direct from Vermont, which I understand is one of the 50 states. I've not been there, but I understand it has trees and mountains and very few people, I think, actually. But let's welcome in Clay Jenkinson to the program. Hello, sir. How are you?
Yeah, and if we get frozen, which we might, we'll just regroup because it comes and goes. I'm in kind of a dicey place for the internet, but I am in Vermont, and boy, really known what Green Mountain Boys means, but these are green mountains. It's a perfect time of year here. There's so many colors of green, Mike. North Dakota gets green for about 3.5 weeks in June. There are probably 30 varieties of green in the shrubs, the bushes, the flowers, the grasses, and so on. So there's that. I'm in a campground. Probably people know I'm on this large epic Travels with Charlie journey through America. They can go to my website, ltamerica.org, or to the Listening to America Facebook site. So I'm here, and I'm really glad to talk with you, but the tech has been a little bit dicey. So I understand, crazy stuff is happening in your part of the world.
Well, let me get this little tidbit out of the way before we start talking about our guy, Doug Burgum, is that we're doing this by a Zoom-like program, and your video is freezing up at times on me, Clay, but your voice is coming through, though. Even as your face freezes, your voice continues, which make of that what you will. So just keep on talking, even if things seem like they're frozen up. We'll do that. So the reason we're doing this podcast today is because I received a text the other day that had 5 words in it. Can you believe Doug Burgum?
Who sent that?
Well, you sent that, as a matter of fact, and that led me to say, well, let's do a podcast about this because the governor of North Dakota is busy trying to get as close as he possibly can to the likely Republican nominee for president, Donald Trump, and that included this week flying to New York City and going to a courthouse in Lower Manhattan to sit in the courtroom during Donald Trump's hush money trial. And Doug Burgum, as all these Republican bobos do, held a little quote unquote press conference outside the courthouse and said, "Oh, this is a sham of a trial. It's a scam of a trial. And the American people know that this is a sham and a scam. And I've made my dogs bark with my voice." But go ahead, Clay, and say what you want to say while I get my dogs to shut up here. Go ahead.
So, Mike, as you know from our many, many conversations over the years, that I have had a lot of respect for Doug Burgum, for Governor Burgum, that I tend to be more respectful of him than you tend to be. And I'm not an apologist for him by any means, but I do have enormous respect for him. And I think he would have been a good president of the United States if he could have gotten there. He got about 1%, so not going to happen, certainly not this time. But I'm not a detractor, and I have agreements at times, but that's neither here nor that. That's how politics works. But his flattery of former President Trump is really sickening to me, I have to say, and dispiriting too. And here's why. Let's just look at the facts for a moment. There's no question that Donald Trump had a sexual one-night stand with a porn star named Stormy Daniels. He dangled in front of her the possibility that he would then invite her on Celebrity Apprentice, which he had no intention of doing once he'd gotten what he wanted from her. And she was very reluctant, but she did it because she thought it might advance her career and so on. Once he got what he wanted, he moved on, as one, of course, would expect. Then he lied about it. He lied publicly. He lied privately. He lied legally. He called her a horse face. He said she wasn't his type. Then he committed apparently misdemeanors or possibly even felonies by trying to cover up the payments that went to his attorney, Michael Cohen, and through him to her. The man given birth to his last child. He's in Lake Tahoe. He has a purely opportunistic sexual relation with Stormy Daniels. It's classical harassment. It's classical sexual harassment because he's dangling possibility for her that he doesn't intend to make happen. This is the very definition of coercive sexual harassment. So even if you take out the legal stuff, Governor Burgum has said, well, it's just a bookkeeping thing and it's a sham and so on. Even if you take out the legal business, what is Doug Burgum, a man I respect, doing, committing himself to this man who does this sort of thing on a routine basis, and not only flattering him, clearly angling either for the vice president's job or for a cabinet position? This is pure, ugly, opportunistic, valueless opportunism, and it's not worthy of a North Dakotan. And, I heard Governor Burgum, when he was running, saying, I come from the kind of place where you have to work hard as a chimney sweep and people who take our shower at the end of the day, and we have rural values, and we do the hard. And I say, read Matthew 16:26. What does it gain to get the whole world and lose your? Is there, Mike? Let me ask you this: is there any plausible explanation or defense of what Governor Burgum is doing except naked ambition?
Well, obviously, from my writings and my speaking with you and others on this podcast about my beliefs of what Doug Burgum is doing, I believe that it is 100% political opportunism and personal blind at any cost ambition. However, so I can't answer other than that and just say I believe it is 100% those things I just said. However, I will just recite a letter to the editor that ran in our newspaper the other day from former Fargo Mayor John Lindgren, who threw out the idea that no. Doug Burgum is not doing this for personal ambition or for opportunism. He's doing it to get the Republican Party back on track. It's an altruistic thing he's doing because he, Doug Burgum, sees what MAGA has done to the Republican Party, and he's just doing this to get the Republican Party back on track. I think that's utter and complete horse hockey. And I would use stronger language if I could on a publicly broadcast podcast, and if my bosses wouldn't get upset with me. But there are those, Clay, who will find excuses and reasons why they believe Doug Burgum is doing this other than just naked ambition and a naked play for power. That's the word I keep using is Doug Burgum sees the opportunity to have power, that this might be his shot, right? I mean, don't throw away your shot, to quote the Hamilton musical. And this is Doug Burgum's a smart guy. I've never not said that. Would he be a better president than Donald Trump? Yes, he would. There's no question. Anybody would be a better president than Donald Trump, other than, well, I'm not gonna throw the names out there because it'll just get me in trouble. But Doug Burgum would be a better president than Donald Trump. I have no doubt about that. But to try to paint this as anything other than what it is I think is beneath John Lindgren and anybody else, for what it matters what John Lindgren says. I don't think it matters much. But I don't know how the people of North Dakota in general feel about this. I mean, the people I hear from when I write or talk about this is it's always from either Doug Burgum apologists or it's from Republicans who just hate me anyway, who tell me to go blank myself because I'm Joe Biden's incompetent old man, whatever, have your beliefs, whatever. But I never hear from anybody that says, Mike, stop and think about this. Maybe Doug Burgum, sees this as this or that, or he wants to be energy secretary for this reason, or he wants to be vice president for that reason. I haven't had anybody, and that includes, by the way, our numerous conservative columnists that we run in the forum. None of them has made a strong case for what Doug Burgum's doing. They just yell about me and Jim Shaw and Tony Bender and everybody else who dares question Doug Burgum's motives.
Well, a couple of things. So, plausible reasons that he might be doing this. And let me say again, I'm an admirer. I'd be happy if he were the president of the United States. Frank, a better president in many respects than the current incumbent. I'm not a partisan Democrat. I see that the country doesn't really want either of these old men. That Joe Biden, is prone to certain gaffes. He's shuffling a little bit. There's his mental acuity is not what it would have been at 30, but mine isn't what it was 4 days ago. And I do think Doug Burgum would be a great cabinet secretary, great secretary of education, great secretary of energy, great secretary of agriculture. Any of those strike me as truly honorable things for him to do. I hope that if Trump wins, that's what he gets. I don't really see him as vice president of the United States. And one thing he should know is that whatever Trump touches turns to crap. Ask Mike Pence, ask Bill Barr, ask hundreds of people that got close, and they all said the same thing, that they were going to make him more reasonable, that they were going to rein him in, that they were going to be the adult in the room, that they were going to have a kind of a cautioning or calming effect, and it never works. So there's that. So here Pence's. If I become a cabinet secretary or if I become the vice president, this can only be good for North Dakota. There's some truth to that, I think, although I don't think that that's his reasoning. The second reason would be Donald Trump. Well, I agree with whoever's the next vice president, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, has a good chance of being the next president. It doesn't seem clear to me that either Trump or Joe Biden will live through the next 4 years. Either they will fade away under the 25th Amendment, or they could die in office. Either one of them. I don't think I would take bets on which one's more likely, but the actuarial tables have caught up with these two men, and at least Donald Trump's lifestyle is by no means health food and tofu. So those seem to me the only excuses, but I don't think that's what's going on here, Mike. I think that Doug Burgum, a good and decent man, has gotten the taste of power, and he wants a lot more to you or to me. But I appeal to you, Governor Burgum, to back away and apologize for this. This is not North Dakota. This is not American values. This is not a good person. His policies, taxes and borders and international relations and so on, one can not a good human being, and it degrades everything I care about in North Dakota to see this happen. Would Bill Guy do this? Absolutely not. Would Jack Dalrymple do this? Absolutely not. Would John Hoeven when he was governor? No. Would Art Link do this? Never in a zillion years. So who else in North Dakota history his future in front of her over it? Now, I will say I do think he's going to be acquitted. That's another question. But I just asked Doug Burgum, I have deep respect for, to think again about this and to pull away, because I believe he's losing his a considerable part of his place in the history of North Dakota. I don't think he's going to be any of these things in the end, frankly. I don't think it'll work out well for Governor Burgum, because just ask all the other cabinet secretaries from the last round. So I just don't see it. And I'm so disappointed in him. And I don't like to say that. You can see how unhappy I am saying this, because I don't want to be some easy critic of Doug Burgum, but I can't respect this. And I don't think most Americans and most North Dakotans, even MAGA North Dakotans, in their heart of hearts, really respect this choice.
Well, MAGA North Dakotans would not respect it because they don't view Doug Burgum as a true MAGA patriot. They actually don't like Doug Burgum because he's an elite.
Too reasonable.
He's educated. He's elite. He's way too far to the left. I think most North Dakotans know that Doug Burgum was at one time a moderate businessman from Fargo who was pro-choice and, again, a Microsoft executive. I don't think they see him as an evangelical for sure, because he doesn't wear any sort of religion on his sleeve like a Mike Pence did. I think most North Dakotans view Doug Burgum as, yeah, he's a decent governor, but I'm not going to go to the mat for him. I mean, they're not going to, they voted for him, obviously, whatever, 65, 70%. But again, as we've said many times before, they would vote for this, felt tip pen if it had an R behind its name, because it's North Dakota, that's a whole different discussion.
Do you think that in his heart of hearts, I mean, he's married to an extraordinary woman. He's surrounded with some extraordinary young people. He travels in establishment circles in North Dakota. He's a well-respected man and businessman. He's articulate. He's a policy wonk. He knows what he's talking about. Do you think that the people closest to him are saying, Governor, wow, what are you doing here?
No. Nope. He has had nobody tell him that. And I say that for a couple reasons. I don't know Doug Burgum from Adam. Obviously, I've talked to him many times in my life. I don't know him. But one thing that I have heard from multiple people that do know him well is that he surrounds himself with people who say what he wants to hear. And he had these meetings at Microsoft and would have the team together, and they would throw ideas around the room and they would come up with solutions. And in the end, it's whatever Doug Burgum decided to do is what he was going to do. I've heard that about some of his dealings in state government as well. In specific, the famed changing of the North Dakota legendary logo. I think you and I have talked about this before, that he had consulted nobody and asked nobody's opinion and just didn't even think about it before he decided to change the logo and give the business to some of his friends in Hawley, Minnesota. And so there's nothing that would tell me that people around him are giving him the truth and saying, Doug, this is a bad idea. The other thing is, I don't think the people he surrounds himself with disagree with what he's doing.
We're going to get pushback, especially you, of course, but we'll get pushback over this. I want to say to anyone listening, if they're still listening, I'm an admirer of Doug Burgum. I think he would be a good president of the United States. I think he might even be a great president of the United States. I have the deepest respect for him in all sorts of different ways, and I like him, and I love his love of the Badlands. I love his belief that the future of North Dakota can be energy. I love entrepreneurial spirit. I've been an admirer since the moment that I met him, and there have been some disappointments along the way, but this is what happens in politics. That's neither here nor there. So I don't want anyone to think, oh, there you go, trying to beat up on Doug Burgum. I don't feel that at all. He's better than that. He's much better. The old view that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I think when you get a taste when you're out there in Iowa trying to get the voters of Iowa to make you a serious candidate, and you get that feeling of and I'm sure he feels it. I'm sure he thinks deep in his mind right now, as Lyndon Johnson felt in 1960 when the Kennedys chose him as vice president. He thinks, if I'm vice president, the chance that I'm the 48th president of the United States. I think that he believes that this is this is compromise for the payoff that might come at the other end.
Yeah, no, right. I think this is all very calculated, again, because he's a smart guy. He knows exactly what he's doing. I think many Republicans who we once viewed as moderates or, reasonable Republicans, if I can use that term, I think more of them have bought into the MAGA talking points than we give them credit for. I think a person like Kelly Armstrong has shifted to the right, truly has, not just saying the things he has to say to get elected. I think he has shifted farther to the right. I think Doug Burgum truly believes some of the things that he says about, Joe Biden ruining this country. I think Republicans generally believe that, even if we look at them as being more reasonable or more middle of the road. And so some of the stuff he's saying, he believes. Some of it is calculated to, have him get sucked up to Donald Trump. And it's all by plan. The amazing part for me is going to be 20 years down the road when we find out if Doug Burgum ran for president with this in mind all along, that he never really believed he was going to be president through the normal way, never believed he was going to win the nomination, but he thought that was his entrance onto a national stage so that he could get on Donald Trump's airplane and do what needed to be done to get in Trump's inner circle. And if that's the case, and I believe it's going to end up being that way, that his plan all along was to have it play out exactly as it's playing out, which again, he's not the first politician to do that. He won't be the last, because that's the way it works, is if you are a governor of a small, lightly populated state in the middle of the country that nobody really pays attention to, you have to do what you have to do to get on the national stage. And Doug Burgum did that. The question, obviously, for you and I is at what price, but it doesn't matter to him. It does not matter. Let me ask you this, as we're about halfway through our podcast here. So you and I and Tony Bender and Jim Shaw and Joel Heitkamp and all the usual suspects are appalled at what we see from Doug Burgum for various reasons. I listened to Joel Heitkamp's show. I caught 10 minutes of it the other day driving into the office, and Joel was calling for Doug Burgum to resign his position as governor because he doesn't want to be governor anymore. He's never here. He's out in New York or Washington or Iowa or whatever. And Joel made his case, and that's fine. But we're all kind of in the same boat, that we're all looking at Doug Burgum as this appalling transformation that he's had. What if the rest of the country doesn't see it that way? I mean, I just read a column at CNN.com from a guy who was an assistant to George W. Bush and was a staff member of Mitch McConnell's, a gentleman named Scott Jennings. And Scott Jennings wrote a column saying that Doug Burgum is and should be the front runner to be vice president because he's just that damn good. That he is. No one has played their cards better than the affable former businessman turned governor of the Peace Garden state. And then he paints Burgum as this humble character that, he just doesn't even think of himself as a powerful politician. But then he says, what's the argument for Burgum? Why don't you take it from here, Clay, while I go again and get my dogs to be quiet. Go right ahead.
Every time Mike gets worked up, the dogs do too. A couple of things. First, I do think, just everyone who's listening, just go read Matthew 16:26. That tells me everything I need to know. But secondly, I don't think that Donald Trump is going to choose Doug Burgum. I think it would be a smart thing if he did. And I think, as I've said 3 or 4 times now, if for some reason Doug Burgum became president, I would be very happy. I don't think that Donald Trump is likely to choose him for a variety of reasons. Although I will this substance, I mean, but just his that he's from Trump in his circle, it's good. He's more articulate, more forceful than most of the people who are out there doing this kind of work for former President Trump. So I don't think that Trump is going to choose him. Probably he'll choose Tim Scott. I think Kristi Noem has shot herself in the foot. I just don't think that Burgum brings enough Trumpian pizzazz. Too responsible. I think Doug Burgum would be more out. Trump chooses him, which I doubt. Let's say that Trump wins, which I also doubt. We'll see what happens at that point. I'm not with Joel Heitkamp. I think the state is fine. It's not as if there are floods going on in Bowman and there's a meth outbreak in Williston. The state's fine. It's being well governed. That's neither here nor there. I think. And I'm a partisan Democrat. But I think that Doug Burgum is better than this. And I promise you that some part of him is agonizing over this at night and thinking, what am I doing here? He has to be, because if the pastor of his church were sleeping with porn stars and covering it up and harassing them, that pastor would be gone in 24 hours. How did it happen, Mike, that we've all come to think that Trump is just so Trump that we just have to shrug now? And no matter what awful thing he does, we just shrug. And I think that someone like Doug Burgum has character. And I think this is a lapse. And that's what I'm calling for. I'm calling for him to recognize that lapse and you're just shaking your head.
I am. I think you give Doug Burgum way too much credit, that he lies awake at night and tosses and turns going, oh, what am I doing, Catherine? Oh, I'm selling my soul here. Doug Burgum gets up in the middle of the night, goes and looks in the bathroom mirror and goes, Mr. President. And that's what he sees, and that's what he believes he is, and that's what this is all about. And I just don't give any politician, maybe Paul Wellstone, but any politician, the benefit of the doubt that this isn't all just that they're willing to sell their soul to get what they want. And in most cases, that's power. Back to my point before my dogs interrupted me again. This gentleman, Scott Jennings, who writes for CNN.com and other publications, wrote a glowing column about Doug Burgum. And when I read it, as I said earlier, I thought, well, okay, I mean, because I am partisan. You're not. I am very partisan, obviously. But I can also look at myself and go, okay, am I missing something here with Doug Burgum? When I look at him, I just see this guy who's this craven opportunist that's just doing all this for his own narcissistic reasons. But Scott Jennings, if you read this column, he makes the case that Doug Burgum would make a very good vice presidential choice, in part because he is reasonable and smart and low-key, no drama, which, by the way, Mike Pence was also very low-key to the point of having almost no pulse for much of his time in the White House. But I mean, so it's a balance to Trump, right? Is to offer that balance. But let me read Scott Jennings' words here. What's the argument for Burgum? He's a middle America governor who cares more about the economy and the intersection of energy policy and national security than political self-aggrandizement. A self-made businessman who could be a boon to Trump in campaign fundraising, and a no-drama governing partner who clearly has a passion for taming the federal bureaucracy. Oh, and he hasn't turned his Dakota into a gruesome pet cemetery like his neighbor to the south. If you consider Trump to be, in his heart, a casting director, there's no one in America who looks and sounds more like a loyal vice president than Burgum, who even accompanied Trump in court on Tuesday to show his support. Burgum has proven capable in business and in government, and Trump must surely appreciate the hustle of Burgum defending him against what the former president believes to be a criminal case motivated by politics. And so again, my question is, and obviously Scott's a Republican, but my question is, are we not seeing what everybody else sees? That we're seeing it strictly as aggrandizement and narcissism. Republicans around the country look at Doug Burgum and go, wow, North Dakota is rich because of oil, low unemployment, low crime, low unemployment. Doug Burgum he's a successful businessman. He'd make a great vice president. So I mean, are we missing the boat here? That's my question.
Maybe. I agree with Scott Jennings almost entirely in what he said. I do think that Burgum would be, at least early on, a cautionary person in the administration. He would bring good sense. He's not a crazy man. I don't think he's MAGA to the core. I think that he's MAGA because it's in his interest to support that movement, but I don't think that's who he really is. Yeah, okay, fine. I mean, that makes sense. And let me say this too. If he were saying now on national television, look, I am not okay with some of the things that Donald Trump does. I think that his treatment of women is really problematic, and women really matter in my, I think that there's a lot of criminality, or at least there's a lot of moral turpitude in some of the things that Mr. Trump has done. On the other hand, I do think that this is a politically motivated trial. I think that then I would really have a different view of this. But of course, as you were about to say, even if he had, I thought he was a kind of Mitt Romney character, but a savvy businessman, Mitt Romney character. If he were a moderate, he wouldn't be under consideration. And so he's had to say, where do I go? A serious possibility of a position. And it turns out he went all the way down the path. And I don't think he had to, but I know that it's a tough tiptoeing act over a minefield, because Trump demands absolute 100% loyalty and flattery and soul self-destruction of anyone around him. Just think of how he humiliated Mike Pence as president of the United States, and humiliated almost everyone else that he ever worked with. I get it, but I don't think it's that important. I think, if Burgum had gotten 8 or 9% in the primaries, this would be another story. But he fell flat in the primaries. He doesn't yet have the stature. Maybe he's gaining it now because he's getting this kind of attention from not just right-wing media, but centrist media too. We'll see. But Governor Burgum, and I think he knows it. And I guess that's my whole point.
We will end it there, Clay, because you are breaking up more and more with every passing minute. So
I thought it was you.
No, it was you. So we'll
You'll have to edit. You'll have to do some editing in this one. I'm sorry.
we'll see. We'll see if it turns out. If not, there's going to be some Nixon-like gaps in the tape here. If
18.5-minute gap where I said he's the greatest man who ever lived.
yeah, exactly. Yep. So we'll end it there. We'll do this again soon when you have not as many green trees and green mountains surrounding you, and we'll catch up again soon. Okay. All right. And again, you're cut out, so I'll let things go. This has been the McFeely Mess podcast at inform.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk again soon.
Thanks for listening to the McFeely Mess podcast at inform.com. For more podcasts and columns, head to inform.com and search Mike McFeely